All right, how's everyone doing today? This morning we are going to read through Chapter 2 of 1984, Part 3. Chapter 2 of 1984, Chapter 2 of 1984. Just a second here. And this will not be a typical reading, of course. What we're going to do is read through it slowly and look at words that are interesting or phrases that are interesting and talk about their meaning. So this is a very good way to improve your advanced vocabulary. If you already speak English, it's just a very in-depth examination of 1984. But if you're learning English, this is a good way to improve your understanding and your vocabulary and all that good stuff. Now, in the beginning of Chapter 1 of Part 3, Winston was in a jail cell. He had been caught or discovered, and while he was in his jail cell, he met several people that he knew. A co-worker who made a mistake in his job was in jail, and his neighbor, whose children turned him into the police, was in jail. There was somebody else, I think, that he knew, but I don't remember who. Well, he's waiting, and we know that there's a room called Room 101, 101, 101, that everyone is afraid of. Terrible things must happen in Room 101. And we also learned that O'Brien wasn't really on his side and set him up to be caught. So he's been betrayed by everyone except for Julia. He was lying on something that felt like... Oh, by the way, if you're watching this live, I encourage you, if you have a question about a word or a phrase, something you don't understand, I really do want you to ask questions. So in the comments, make your questions, and hopefully I will see it, and then I will try to answer it for you. That's what makes this fun and interesting, is the fact that you can ask questions. Otherwise, I just pick words I think probably you don't know, or phrases that might be useful for you. But definitely ask questions if you find anything that you're not sure about. Okay, now let's get started with Chapter 2 of Part 3. He was lying on something like that felt like a camp bed, except it was higher off the ground, and he was fixed down in some way so that he could not move. Light that seemed stronger than usual was falling on his face. O'Brien was standing at his side, looking down at him intently. At the other side of him stood a man in a white coat, holding a hypodermic syringe. Well, in case you don't know, a syringe or a hypodermic syringe is this. Find a picture of that. This is a syringe. So O'Brien is in the room, and there's also someone in a white coat holding a syringe. O'Brien was standing at his side, looking down at him intently. And at the other side of him stood a man in a white coat holding a hypodermic syringe. Even after his eyes were open, he took in his surroundings only gradually. To take something in is to observe something, and it's kind of like eating with your eyes. When you take something in, you look around to discover what's happening. So even after his eyes were open, he took in his surroundings. So he was looking around thinking, where am I? What is this place? Trying to get an idea of this place where he was. He had the impression of swimming up into this room from some quite different world, a sort of underworld far beneath it. How long had he been down there he did not know. Since the moment when they arrested him, he had not seen darkness or daylight. Besides, his memories were not continuous. There had been times when his consciousness, even the sort of consciousness that has been in sleep, had stopped dead and started again after a blank interval. But whether the intervals were of days or weeks or or only seconds, there was no way of knowing. With that first blow on the elbow, blow is a hit, blow. And this is the elbow. With that first hit on the elbow, the nightmare had started. Later, he was to realize that all that happened was merely a routine interrogation to which nearly all prisoners were subjected. There was a long range of crimes, espionage, sabotage, and the like, to which everyone had to confess as a matter of course. The confession was a formality, though the torture was real. How many times he had been beaten, how long the beatings had continued, he could not remember. Always there were 5 or 6 men in black uniforms at him simultaneously. Sometimes it was fists. Sometimes it was truncheons. Sometimes it was steel rods. Sometimes it was boots. There were times when he rolled about on the floor, as shameless as an animal, writhing his body this way and that. Writhing is like the movement of a snake. So he was on the floor, moving like this. Writhing his body this way and that. In an endless, hopeless effort to dodge the kicks, and simply inviting more and yet more kicks. In his ribs, in his belly, on his elbows, on his shins, in his groin, in his testicles, on the bone at the base of his spine. Shins are... We might as well talk about this since we're here. Let's see. Shins... It's like the front part of your bottom leg. Here's a good picture that shows what that is. So you see, this is the shin. The shin is like the front part of the bottom of the leg. Now let's see if I can find a picture of groin that isn't X-rated. Let's see. Groin. Okay. This'll work. This area where the 2 legs meet in the bottom, that's the groin. So that could be on a man or a woman. That's the groin area. It went on until the cruel, wicked, unforgivable thing seemed to him not that the guards continued to beat him, but that he could not force himself into losing consciousness. So he was just trying to escape into his mind, but he couldn't do it. There were times when his nerve so forsook him that he began shouting for mercy. To forsake something. We've seen that word "for" in front of foresee, forgive, foretell. To forsake something is to abandon something. So his nerve forsook him. That means his nerve abandoned him. His braveness abandoned him. Let's see. Still waters run deep is asking... Could I please ask you a question about on purpose, intention, deliberately, and meant to? Is there a subtle difference between them? Let's see. He did it on purpose. He had the intention to do it. He deliberately did it. He meant to do it. He did it on purpose. He meant to do it. I wish there was a difference because they all seem like the same thing. I want to say that there's a difference, but I don't think there really is. Let's see. He hit me on purpose. He hit me deliberately. He meant to hit me. I can't really see a difference, to be honest with you. Sorry. I wish there was a difference because it's so many ways to say the same thing. But to me it seems the same. I think the most common one is on purpose. So when his nerve forsook him, so forsake means abandon. When his braveness, here I think nerve means braveness. When his braveness abandoned him, he began shouting for mercy. Even more before the beating began. Even before the beating began. When the mere sight of his fist, of a fist drawn back for a blow was enough to make him pour forth a confession, real or imaginary crimes. There were other times when he started out with the resolve of confessing nothing, when every word had to be forced out of him between gasps of pain. And remember, a gasp is when you take in air. That's gasping. Gasps of pain. And there were times when he feebly tried to compromise. Feeble means very humble or weak or shy. Something like that. When he said to himself, I will confess, but not yet. I must hold out till the pain becomes unbearable. 3 more kicks, 2 more kicks, and then I will tell them what they want. Sometimes he was beaten until he could hardly stand, and then flung like a sack of potatoes on the stone floor of a cell, left to recuperate for a few hours. To recuperate means to recover. So they would beat him for a very long time, and then they would leave him on the floor for a few hours so that he could recuperate for a few hours, and then taken out and beaten again. There were also longer periods of recovery. He remembered them dimly. Remember, dim means very little light. It's the opposite of bright. And if you have a dim memory, it's a memory with not very much light to it. It's a very unclear memory. Not very many details. He remembered them dimly because they were spent chiefly in sleep or a stupor. A stupor, it's kind of a state of consciousness between sleeping and awake. So if you take drugs or drink a lot of alcohol, you could be in a stupor. Or if you haven't slept for a very long time, if you stay awake for 24 hours or 48 hours, you'll be in like a weird, different kind of consciousness where you don't really understand reality very well, and that's a stupor. You don't really know what's happening around you when you're in a stupor. He remembered a cell with a plank bed. A plank is like a long piece of wood. And a sort of shelf sticking out from the wall. And a tin wash basin, and meals of hot soup and bread, and sometimes coffee. He remembered a surly barber arriving to scrape his chin and crop his hair. Surly means serious, or like kind of like serious and unhappy. Wait, let's check. Let's check what is the official definition of surly. It's kind of like unhappy, serious. Bad-tempered, unfriendly. Yeah, something like that. A surly barber arrived to scrape his chin and crop his hair. Crop means like cut. And businesslike, unsympathetic men in white coats, feeling his pulse, tapping his reflexes, turning up his eyelids, running harsh fingers over him in search for broken bones, and shooting needles into his arm to make him sleep. The beatings grew less frequent, and became mainly a threat, a horror to which he could be sent back to any moment when his answers were unsatisfactory. His questioners now were not ruffians in black uniforms, but party intellectuals. Ruffians, well, you know the word rough, which is kind of the opposite of soft, and a rough person is a hard, mean person, and a ruffian is someone who uses violence. So his interrogators, the people asking him questions, were no longer big, tough people hurting him and using violence, but they were party intellectuals. Little, rotund. Rotund means round. So that's kind of a polite way of saying fat. Little fat men, little rotund men. It's still not nice to call someone rotund, so don't do it. But it's better than saying fat. Okay, little rotund men with quick movements and flashing spectacles who worked on him in relays. A relay is when you take turns. So if they worked on him in relays, that means like one team came in and then they left, and then another team came in and they left. So they were always changing teams coming and working on him. And that's what a relay is. Over periods which lasted, he thought, he could not be sure, 10 or 12 hours at a stretch. These other questioners saw to it that he was in constant slight pain, but it was not chiefly pain that they relied on. They slapped his face, they wrung his ears, refused him leave to urinate, shone glaring lights in his face until his eyes ran with water. But the aim of this was simply to humiliate him and destroy his power of arguing and reasoning. Their real weapon was the merciless questioning that went on and on, hour after hour, tripping him up. To trip someone up means to make a trap for them. That's like, well, let's see. I can't think of an example of tripping someone up. It's like you keep asking someone questions like, where were you last night? I was at the party. Oh, John was at the party. How is John? Oh, he was fine. John was not at the party. You're lying. That's tripping someone up. It's like asking them questions and until you catch them lying, and then you say, "Ha, got you." So tripping him up, laying traps for him, twisting everything that he said, convicting him at every step of lies and self-contradiction, until he began weeping as much from shame as from nervous fatigue. So weeping is like very strong crying. So until he began to cry very much from shame and from nervous fatigue. Fatigue means being very tired. Sometimes he would weep half a dozen times in a single session. Most of the time they screamed abuse at him and threatened at every hesitation to deliver him over to the guards again. But sometimes they would suddenly change their tune, call him comrade, appeal to him in the name of Ingsoc and Big Brother, and ask him sorrowfully whether even now he had not enough loyalty to the party left to make him wish to undo the evil he had done. When his nerves were in rags after hours of questioning, even this appeal could reduce him to sniveling tears. In the end, the nagging voices broke him down more completely than the boots and fists of the guards. He became simply a mouth that uttered, a hand that signed whatever was demanded of him. His sole concern was to find out what they wanted him to confess, and then confess it quickly before the bullying started anew. He confessed to the assassination of eminent party members. Eminent means very important or very admired. The distribution of seditious pamphlets, embezzlement of public funds. Embezzling is like stealing money, but not like with a gun, in a more clever way. Like working in an office and changing a number. The sale of military secrets, sabotage of every kind. He confessed that he had been a spy in the pay of the East Asian government as far back as 1968. He confessed that he was a religious believer, an admirer of capitalism, and a sexual pervert. He confessed that he had murdered his wife, although he knew, and his questioners must have known, that his wife was still alive. He confessed that for years he had been in personal touch with Goldstein and had been a member of an underground organization which had included almost every human being he had ever known. It was easier to confess everything and implicate everybody. Besides, in a sense, it was all true. It was true that he had been an enemy of the party, and in the eyes of the party, there was no distinction between the thought and the deed. There were also memories of another kind. They stood out in his mind disconnectedly, like pictures with blackness all around them. He was in a cell which might have been either dark or light, because he could see nothing except a pair of eyes. Neither at hand some kind of instrument was near at hand was some kind of instrument was ticking slowly and regularly. So if something is near at hand, it means it's close enough that you can take it. It's close enough that you can grab it. So it's very close. Near at hand means it's very close to you, in touching distance. And it says that something was ticking slowly and regularly. Tick is like the sound of a clock. So maybe there was a timer or a clock next to them. The eyes grew larger and more luminous. Luminous means giving light. So the eyes became bigger and there was more light coming from the eyes. Suddenly, he floated out of his seat, divided into the eyes, and was swallowed up. He was strapped into a chair, surrounded by dials. Dials are... No, let's take a look at a picture of dials. You don't really see dials anymore. Everything's a button. So even if your vocabulary is pretty advanced, you may not deal with dials very much, and so you probably don't know what they are. But these are dials. So it's how you change something from intense to low, but in a circular way, not up and down or not touching, but moving in a circle. He was strapped into a chair, surrounded by dials, under dazzling lights. A man in a white coat was reading the dials. There was the tramp of heavy boots. So tramp is boom, 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 boom. That's the tramp of heavy boots outside. The door clanged open. The waxed-faced officer marched in, followed by two guards. "Room 101, said the officer. The man in the white coat did not turn around. He did not look at Winston either. He was looking only at the dials. He was rolling down a mighty corridor, a kilometer wide, full of glorious golden light, roaring with laughter and shouting out confessions at the top of his voice. He was confessing everything, even the things he had succeeded in holding back under the torture. He was relating the entire history of his life to an audience who knew it already. With him were the guards. The other questioners, the men in white coats, O'Brien, Julia, Mr. Charrington, all rolling down the corridor together and shouting with laughter. Some dreadful thing which had lain embedded in the future had now been skipped over and had not happened. Everything was all right. There was no more pain. The last detail of his life was laid bare, understood, forgiven. What, is he going crazy, or are all those people really going down the hallway with him? I'm not sure. He was starting up from the plank bed in the half-certainty that he had heard O'Brien's voice. All through his interrogation, although he had never seen him, he had never the feeling that O'Brien was at his elbow, just out of sight. It was O'Brien who was directing everything. It was he who set the guards on to Winston and who prevented them from killing him. It was he who decided when Winston should scream with pain, when he should have a respite. A respite is a rest, a break. When he should be fed, when he should sleep, when the drug should be pumped into his arms. It was he who asked the questions and suggested the answers. He was the tormentor. The tormentor is the person who is responsible for torture or who is responsible for hurting other people. He was the protector. So he was the person who hurt, but also the person who protected. He was the inquisitor. The inquisitor, that's the person asking questions. He was the friend. And once, Winston could not remember whether it was in drugged sleep or in normal sleep or in a moment of wakefulness, a voice murmured into his ear, "Don't worry, Winston. You are in my keeping. For 7 years I have watched over you. Now the turning point has come. I shall save you. I shall make you perfect." He was not sure whether it was O'Brien's voice, but it was the same voice that said to him, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness," in that other dream 7 years ago. He did not remember any ending to his interrogation. There was a period of blackness, and then the cell or room in which he now Wait, I have to read that over again. There was a period of blackness, and then the cell, or room, in which he now had gradually materialized. In which he now was. It seems like there's a comma missing. Okay, let's try that again. There was a period of blackness, and then the cell, or room, in which he now had gradually materialized around him. He was almost flat on his back and unable to move. His body was held down at every essential point. Even the back of his head was gripped in some manner. O'Brien was looking down at him gravely and rather sadly. Gravely means seriously. His face, seen from below, looked coarse and worn, with pouches under the eyes and tired lines from nose to chin. He was older than Winston had thought. He was older than Winston had thought him. He was perhaps 48 or 50. Under his hand there was a dial, with a lever on top, and figures running round the face. "I told you," said O'Brien, "that if we met again, it would be here." "Yes," said Winston, without any warning except a slight movement of O'Brien's hand. A wave of pain flooded his body. It was a frightening pain, because he could not see what was happening, and he had the feeling that some mortal injury was being done to him. Mortal means, if you're immortal, that means you can live forever, but if you're mortal, that means one day you will die. And if you have a mortal injury, that means it's an injury that will kill you. So this pain was so strong. Winston didn't know what it was, but he felt like it was a mortal pain. It was a pain of something that would kill him. He did not know whether the thing was really happening or whether the effect was electrically produced, but his body was being wrenched out of shape. The joints were being slowly torn apart. Although the pain had brought the sweat out on his forehead, the worst of all was the fear that his backbone was about to snap. He set his teeth and breathed hard through his nose, trying to keep silent as long as possible. "You're afraid," said O'Brien, watching his face, "that in another moment something is going to break. Your especial fear is that it will be your backbone. You have a vivid mental picture of the vertebrae snapping apart, and the spinal fluid dripping out of them. That is what you are thinking. Is it not, Winston?" Winston did not answer. O'Brien drew back the lever on the dial. The wave of pain receded almost as quickly as it had become. "That was 40, said O'Brien. "You can see the numbers on the dial run up to 100. Will you please remember throughout our conversation that I have it in my power to inflict pain on you at any moment, and to whatever degree I choose. If you tell me any lies or attempt to prevaricate in any way, prevaricate. I guess that means lie or exaggerate or something, but let's just check the prevaricate. Speak or act in an evasive way. So that means like if you try to avoid answering the question. If you tell me any lies or attempt to prevaricate, if you try to avoid answering the question directly, or even fall below your usual level of intelligence, you will cry out with pain instantly. Do you understand that? Yes, said Winston. O'Brien's manner became less severe. He resettled his spectacles thoughtfully and took a pace or two up and down. When he spoke, his voice was gentle and patient. He had the air of a doctor, a teacher, even a priest, anxious to explain and persuade rather than to punish. I am taking trouble with you, Winston, he said, because you are worth trouble. You know perfectly well what is the matter with you. You have known it for years, though you have fought against the knowledge. You are mentally deranged. You suffer from a defective memory. You are unable to remember real events, and you persuade yourself that you remember other events which never happened. Fortunately, it's curable. You have never cured yourself of it because you did not choose to. There was a small effort of the will that you were not ready to make. Even now, I'm well aware that you are clinging to your disease under the impression that it is a virtue. Now we will take an example. At this moment, which power is Oceania at war with? When I was arrested, Oceania was at war with East Asia. With East Asia, good. And Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, has it not? Winston drew his breath. He opened his mouth to speak and then did not speak. He could not take his eyes away from the dial. The truth, please, Winston, your truth. Tell me what you think you remember. I remember that only till a week before I was arrested, we were not at war with East Asia at all. We were in alliance with them. The war was against Eurasia and had lasted for 4 years. Before that, O'Brien stopped him with a movement of the hand. Another example, he said. Some years ago, you had a very serious delusion indeed. You believed that 3 men, one-time party members named Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, men who were executed for treachery and sabotage after making the fullest possible confession, were not guilty of the crimes they were charged with. You believed that you had seen unmistakable documentary evidence proving that their confessions were false. There was a certain photograph about which you had a hallucination. You believed that you had actually held it in your hands. It was a photograph, something like this. An oblong slip of newspaper had appeared between O'Brien's fingers. For perhaps 5 seconds it was within the angle of Winston's vision. It was a photograph, and there was no question of its identity. It was the photograph. It was another copy of the photograph of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford at the party function in New York, which he had chanced upon 11 years ago. To chance upon something is to encounter or find something by accident or by chance. So when you chance upon something, you find it by accident. You find it unexpectedly. For only an instant it was before his eyes, and then it was out of sight again. But he had seen it unquestionably. He had seen it. He made a desperate, agonizing effort to wrench the top of his body free. It was impossible to move so much as a centimeter in any direction. For the moment, he had even forgotten the dial. All he wanted was to hold the photograph in his fingers again, or at least see it. "It exists!" he cried. "No," said O'Brien. He stepped across the room. There was a memory hole in the opposite wall. O'Brien lifted the grating. Unseen, the frail slip of paper was whirling away on the current of warm air. It was vanishing in a flash of flame. O'Brien turned away from the wall. "Ashes," he said. "Not even identifiable ashes. Dust. It does not exist. It never existed. But it did exist. It does exist. It exists in memory. I remember it. You remember it. I do not remember it." Winston's heart sank. That was doublethink. He had a feeling of deadly helplessness. If he could have been certain that O'Brien was lying, it would not have seemed to matter. But it was perfectly possible that O'Brien had really forgotten the photograph. And if so, then already he would have forgotten his denial of remembering it, and forgotten the act of forgetting. How could one be sure that it was simple trickery? Perhaps that lunatic dislocation in the mind could really happen. That was the thought that defeated him. O'Brien was looking down at him speculatively. When you speculate about something, you're thinking about it. You're trying to guess what is happening. So if O'Brien was looking down at Winston speculatively, he was looking down at him thinking, what is he thinking? More than ever, he had the air of a teacher taking pains with a wayward but promising child. If you're wayward, it means you've gone in the wrong direction. So Winston is a wayward party member. He should be following the party rules and party beliefs, but he's wayward. He's gone in the wrong direction. So what did it say again? It said that O'Brien was looking at him or treating him like a wayward but promising child. So O'Brien was acting like Winston still has potential, but he's just gone in the wrong direction, and I want to help him go in the right direction. "There is a party slogan dealing with the control of the past," he said. "Repeat it, if you please." "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past," repeated Winston obediently. "Who controls the present controls the past," said O'Brien, nodding his head, agreeing with slow approval. "Is it your opinion, Winston, that the past has real existence?" Again, the feeling of helplessness descended upon Winston. His eyes flitted towards the dial. He not only did not know whether yes or no was the answer that would save him from pain, he did not even know which answer he believed to be the true one. O'Brien smiled faintly. Remember, faint means weak. So he just gave a very weak, small smile, not a big smile. You are no metaphysician, Winston, he said. Metaphysics is that's like studying magic, let's say. So when he says you're no metaphysician, you're not someone who can understand the magic of things or the mystical way things work. Until this moment, you had never considered what it is meant by existence. I will put it more precisely. Does the past exist concretely in space? So when O'Brien says you're no metaphysician, it means don't try to think about the past in a more magical or philosophical way. Just tell me, where are you? Are you in the past or are you in the present right now? Just focus on that and forget about whether the past ever existed. You're not entitled or qualified to think about things in that way. I will put it more precisely. Does the past exist concretely in space? So can you touch the past? Is there somewhere or other a place in the world of solid objects where the past is still happening? No. Then where does the past exist, if at all? In records, it is written down. In records and in the mind, in human memories. In memory. Very well. Then we, the party, control all records, and we control all memories. Then we control the past, do we not? But how can you stop people remembering things? Cried Winston, again momentarily forgetting the dial. It is involuntary. It is outside oneself. How can you control memory? You have not controlled mine. O'Brien's manner grew stern again. He laid his hand on the dial. On the contrary, he said, you have not controlled it. That is what brought you here. That is what has brought you here. You are here because you have failed in humility, in self-discipline. You would not make the act of submission, which is the price of sanity. You preferred to be a lunatic, a minority of one. Only the disciplined mind can see reality, Winston. You believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe that the nature of reality is self-evident. When you delude yourself into thinking you see something, you assume that everyone else sees the same thing as you. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind, and nowhere else. Not in the individual mind, which can make mistakes and in any case soon perishes, only in the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal. Whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. It is impossible to see reality except by looking through the eyes of the party. That is the fact that you have got to relearn, Winston. It needs an act of self-destruction, an effort of the will. You must humble yourself before you can become sane. He paused for a few moments, as though to allow what he had been saying to sink in. Do you remember, he went on, writing in your diary, freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. Yes, said Winston. O'Brien held up his left hand, its back towards Winston, with the thumb hidden and 4 fingers extended. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? 4. And if the party says that it is not 4 but 5, then how many? 4. The word ended in a gasp of pain. Remember, gasp is... that's gasping. So the word ended in a gasp of pain. The needle of the dial had shot up to 55. The sweat had sprung out all over Winston's body. The air tore into his lungs and issued again in deep groans, groaning as... that's groaning. Which even by the clenching of his teeth, he could not stop. O'Brien watched him, the four fingers still extended. He drew back the lever. This time, the pain was only slightly eased. So he went all the way up to 55, and then he made it go down. He didn't turn it off, he just made it go down a little bit. How many fingers, Winston? 4. The needle went up to 60. How many fingers, Winston? 4. 4. What else can I say? 4. The needle must have risen again, but he did not look at it. The heavy, stern face and 4 fingers filled his vision. The fingers stood up before his eyes like pillars, enormous, blurry, and seeming to vibrate, but unmistakably 4. How many fingers, Winston? 4. Stop it. Stop it. How can you go on? 4. 4. How many fingers, Winston? 5. 5. 5. No, Winston, that is no use. You are lying. You still think there are 4. How many fingers, please? 4. 5. 4. Anything you like, only stop it. Stop the pain. Abruptly, that means very quickly or very unexpectedly, he was sitting up with O'Brien's arm around his shoulders. He had perhaps lost consciousness for a few seconds. The bonds that had held his body down were loosened. He felt very cold. He was shaking uncontrollably. His teeth were chattering. The tears were rolling down his cheek. For a moment, he clung to O'Brien like a baby, curiously comforted by the heavy arm round his shoulders. He had the feeling that O'Brien was his protector, that the pain was something that came from outside, from some other source, and that it was O'Brien who would save him from it. You are a slow learner, Winston, said O'Brien gently. How can I help it? He blubbered. Blubbering is like crying, but it's like that's blubbering. How can I help it seeing what is in front of my eyes? 2 and 2 are 4. Sometimes, Winston, sometimes they're 5. Sometimes they're 3. Sometimes they're all of them at once. You must try harder. It's not easy to become sane. He laid Winston down on the bed. The grip of his limbs tightened again. And remember, limbs are those are your arms and your legs. Those are your limbs. So when it says that his limbs were tightened again, it means that they were strapping down his legs and his arms, because those are limbs. But the pain had ebbed. That means the pain had become softer, had gone away a little bit. And the trembling had stopped, leaving him merely weak and cold. O'Brien motioned. This is motioning. Oh, wait. I'm trying to get in the picture. This is motioning. Motioned with his head to the man. Oh, so he went like this, like nodding, or like this. In the white coat, who had stood immobile throughout the proceedings. The man in the white coat bent down and looked closely into Winston's eyes, felt his pulse, laid an ear against his chest, tapped here and there, and then nodded to O'Brien. Again? Said O'Brien. The pain flowed into Winston's body. The needle must be at 70, 75. He had shut his eyes this time. He knew that the fingers were still there, and still 4. All that mattered was somehow to stay alive until the spasm was over. He had ceased to notice whether he was crying out or not. The pain lessened again. He opened his eyes. O'Brien had drawn back the lever. How many fingers, Winston? 4. I suppose there are 4. I would see 5 if I could. I'm trying to see 5. Which do you wish to persuade me that you see 5, or that you really see... Let me try that again. Which do you wish? To persuade me that you see 5, or really to see them? Really to see them. Again, said O'Brien. Perhaps the needle was 80, 90. Winston could not intermittently remember why the pain was happening. Behind his screwed-up eyelids, the forest of fingers seemed to be moving in a sort of dance, weaving in and out. disappearing behind one another and reappearing again. He was trying to count them. He could not remember why. He knew only that it was impossible to count them, and that this was somehow due to the mysterious identity between 5 and 4. The pain died down again. When he opened his eyes, it was to find that he was still seeing the same thing. Innumerable fingers, like moving trees, were still streaming past in either direction, crossing and recrossing. He shut his eyes again. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? I don't know. You'll kill me. You'll kill me if you do that again. 4, 5, 6, in all honesty, I don't know. Better, said O'Brien. A needle slid into Winston's arm. Almost in the same instant, a blissful, healing warmth spread through his body. Now, we've seen that word blissful quite a bit. That means like extremely happy, extreme happiness. So when they put the needle in his arm, suddenly he felt extreme happiness, and healing warmth spread all through his body. The pain was already half forgotten. He opened his eyes and looked up gratefully at O'Brien. At sight of the heavy, lined face, so ugly and so intelligent, his heart seemed to turn over. If he could have moved, he would have stretched out a hand and laid it on O'Brien's arm. He had never loved him so deeply as at this moment, and not merely because he had stopped the pain. The old feeling that at bottom it did not matter whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy. He had come back. O'Brien was a person who could be talked to. Perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood. O'Brien had tortured him to the edge of lunacy. Lunacy means going crazy. And in a little while, it was certain he would send him to his death. It made no difference. In some sense that went deeper than friendship. They were intimates, somewhere or other, although the actual words might never be spoken. There was a place where they could meet and talk. O'Brien was looking down at him with an expression that suggested that the same thought might be in his own mind. So Winston is feeling all these weird, kind of like Stockholm syndrome. That's when you start to love the people who are keeping you prisoner. That's called Stockholm syndrome. So Winston still feels this intimacy with O'Brien. And when he looks at O'Brien and he looks at his face, he believes that O'Brien must feel the same, have the same experience. When he spoke, it was in an easy, conversational tone. "Do you know where you are, Winston?" he said. "I don't know. I can guess. In the Ministry of Love." "Do you know how long you've been here?" "I don't know. Days, weeks, months. I think it's months." "And why do you imagine that we bring people to this place?" "To make them confess." "No, that's not the reason. Try again." "To punish them." "No!" exclaimed O'Brien. His face had changed extraordinarily. His face had suddenly become both stern, that means very serious, and animated. "No, not merely to extract your confession, not to punish you. Shall I tell you why we have brought you here? To cure you, to make you sane. Will you understand, Winston, that no one whom we bring to this place ever leaves our hands uncured? We're not interested in those stupid crimes that you've committed. The party's not interested in the overt act. The thought is all we care about. We do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them. Do you understand what I mean by that?" He was bending over Winston. His face looked enormous because of its nearness, and hideously ugly because it was seen from below. Moreover, it was filled with a sort of exaltation, a lunatic intensity. Again, Winston's heart shrank. If it had been possible, He would have cowered. Cowering is like this. He would have cowered deeper into the bed. He felt certain that O'Brien was about to twist the dial out of sheer wantonness. At this moment, however, O'Brien turned away. He took a pace or two up and down, paces like step, and then he continued, less vehemently. The first thing for you to understand is that in this place there are no martyrdoms. You have read of the religious persecution of the past. In the Middle Ages, there was the Inquisition. It was a failure. It set out to eradicate heresy and ended by perpetuating it. For every heretic is burned at the stake, thousands of others rose up. Why was that? Because the Inquisition killed its enemies in the open, and killed them while they were still unrepentant. In fact, it killed them because they were unrepentant. Men were dying because they would not abandon their true beliefs. Naturally, all the glory belonged to the victim, and all the shame to the inquisitor who burned him. Later, in the 20th century, there were the totalitarians, as they were called. There were the German Nazis, the Russian communists. The Russians persecuted heresy more cruelly than the Inquisition had done, and they imagined that they had learned from the mistakes of the past. But they knew at any rate that one must not make martyrs. Before they exposed their victims to public trial, they deliberately set themselves to destroy their dignity. They wore them down by torture and solitude until they were despicable, cringing wretches confessing whatever was put in their mouths, covering themselves with abuse, accusing and sheltering behind one another, whimpering for mercy. And yet, after only a few years, the same thing had happened over again. The dead men had become martyrs, and their degradation was forgotten. Once again, why was it? In the first place, because the confessions they had made were obviously extorted and untrue. Extorted means that they were forced to do it. Nobody believed these confessions. They were forced to do it. We do not make mistakes of that kind. All the confessions that are uttered here are true. We make them true. And above all, we do not allow the dead to rise up against us. You must stop imagining that posterity will vindicate you. Winston, posterity will never hear of you. You will be lifted clean out from the stream of history. We shall turn you into gas and pour you into the stratosphere. Nothing will remain of you, not a name in a register, not a memory in a living brain. You will be annihilated in the past as well as in the future. You will have never existed. Then why bother torture me, thought Winston, with a momentary bitterness. O'Brien checked his step, as though Winston had uttered that thought out loud. His large, ugly face came near, with the eyes a little more narrowed. "You're thinking," he said, "that since we intend to destroy you utterly, so that nothing that you say or do can make the smallest difference, in that case, why do we go through the trouble of interrogating you first? This is what you were thinking, was it not?" "Yes," said Winston. O'Brien smiled slightly. That means like a little bit. "You are a flaw in the pattern. A flaw is like a little mistake, a little unwanted mistake. You are a flaw in the pattern, Winston. You are a stain that must be wiped out. Wiped out means erased. Did I not tell you just now that we are different from the persecutors of the past? We are not content with negative obedience, nor even with the most abject submission. When finally you surrender to us, it must be of your own free will. We do not want to destroy the heretic because he resists us. So long as he resists us, we never destroy him. We convert him. We capture his inner mind. we reshape him. We burn all evil and all illusion out of him. We bring him over to our side, not in appearance, but genuinely, heart and soul. We make him one of ourselves before we kill him. It is intolerable to us. An erroneous thought should exist anywhere in the world, however secret and powerless it may be. Even in the instant of death, we cannot permit any deviation. In the old days, the heretic walked to the stake, still a heretic. A heretic is someone who goes against the religion and says maybe even opposite things to the religion. So that's a very bad thing if you live in a religious society to have a heretic. And the stake, that's the pole where they tie you before they burn you. So the heretic walks to the stake, unrepentant. In the old days, when they killed a heretic, they would march him to kill him, and he would still be saying, "You're all crazy, I hate you." But that's not what they want in this. What they want is to convert the heretic first, completely. Oh yes, I believe everything. And then kill him. That's the difference between now and then. They want you to confess, and they want you to really feel it. In the old days, the heretic walked to the stake, still a heretic, proclaiming his heresy, exulting in it. Even the victim of the Russian purges could carry rebellion locked up in his skull as he walked down the passage, waiting for the bullet. But we make the brain perfect before we blow it out. The command of the old despotisms was, "Thou shalt not." The command of the totalitarians was, "Thou shalt." Our command is, "Thou art." So that's just an older version of English. So "thou shalt not" means, well, let's reread it with a little bit of a modern twist. The command of the old despotisms was, "You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that." The command of the totalitarians was, "Thou shalt." You must do it. You have to do it. And our command is, "Thou art." So our command is, you just are. It's not you shouldn't do it, or you have to do it, or you don't have to do it. Our command is, you just are. We raise you up from when you're a baby to be perfect party members, and there's no telling you what to do. So I guess it's supposed to be like automatic, like programming a computer or something, is the way that they're looking at it. No one whom we bring to this place ever stands out against us. Everyone is washed clean, even those 3 miserable traitors in whose innocence you once believed, Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford. In the end, we broke them down. I took part in their interrogation myself. To take part means participate. I saw them gradually worn down. To wear something down means to make it very tired and useless. Whimpering. That's whimpering. Groveling. Please, please, I'll do anything. Weeping. That's weeping. Oh gosh, this is so horrible. I'm a horrible actor, but that's weeping. That's weeping. And in the end, it was not with pain or fear, only with penitence. Penitence means feeling genuinely sorry and wanting to make things right. By the time we had finished with them, they were only the shells of men. There was nothing left in them except sorrow for what they had done, and love of Big Brother. It was touching to see how they loved him. Touching means it touched my heart. When you say that something is touching, it could even mean that it made you cry because it touched your heart. It made you feel strong emotions. So he says it was touching to see how much they loved Big Brother. It almost made me cry to see how much they loved Big Brother. They begged to be shot quickly so that they could die while their minds were still clean. His voice had grown almost dreamy. The exaltation, the lunatic enthusiasm, was still in his face. He is not pretending, thought Winston. He is not a hypocrite. He believes every word he says. What most depressed him was the consciousness of his own intellectual inferiority. He watched the heavy yet graceful form strolling to and fro, in and out of range of vision. O'Brien was being in all ways larger than himself. There was no idea that he ever had, or could have, that O'Brien had not long ago known, examined, and rejected. His mind contained Winston's mind. But in that case, how could it be true that O'Brien was mad? It must be he, Winston, who was mad. O'Brien halted, and that means stopped. O'Brien stopped and looked down. He halted and looked down. His voice had grown stern again, serious. His voice had grown serious again, stern. Strict. Do not imagine that you will save yourself, Winston. However completely you surrender to us, no one who has once gone astray is ever spared. To spare someone means to, save them. So he's saying, don't imagine that you can lie to us or pretend, or even if you sincerely agree with us again, that you will be saved. We're going to kill you, but first we're going to wash your mind. And even if we chose to let you live without the natural term, to live out the natural term of your life, even if we let you live until you die of natural causes, still, you would never escape from us. What happens to you here is forever. Understand that in advance. We shall crush you down to the point from which there is no coming back. Things will happen to you from which you could not recover. If you lived 1,000 years, never again will you be capable of ordinary human feeling. Everything will be dead inside you. Never again will you be capable of love, or friendship, or joy, of living, or laughter, or curiosity, or courage, or integrity. You will be hollow. That word hollow means nothing inside. There will be nothing inside of you. No feelings. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves. He paused and signed to the man in the white coat. Winston was aware of some heavy piece of apparatus being pushed into place behind his head. O'Brien had sat down beside the bed, so that his face was almost on a level with Winston's. 3,000, he said, speaking over Winston's head to the man in the white coat. 2 soft pads, which felt slightly moist. Moist means a little wet. Clamped themselves against Winston's temples. So they put 2 things right here. These are the temples right here. He quailed. There was a pain coming, a new kind of pain. O'Brien laid a hand reassuringly, almost kindly, on his head. To reassure someone's like, don't worry, it will be okay. So O'Brien laid his hand on Winston's head, almost reassuringly, like, it's okay, it's okay. This time it will not hurt, he said. Keep your eyes fixed on mine. At this moment, there was a devastating explosion, or what seemed like an explosion. Though it was not certain whether there was any noise, there was undoubtedly a blinding flash of light. Winston was not hurt, only prostrated. Although he had already been lying on his back when the thing happened, he had a curious feeling that he had been knocked into that position. A terrific, painless blow had flattened him out. And remember, a blow is like a hit. That's what blow means. So it was a big hit, but it was painless. It didn't hurt. A terrific, painless blow had flattened him out, had made him flat on the bed where he was lying. Also, something happened inside his head. As his eyes regained their focus, he remembered who he was and where he was, and recognized the face that was gazing into his own. Gazing is a type of looking. But somewhere or other there was a large patch of emptiness, as though a piece of him had been taken out of his brain. "It will not last," said O'Brien. "Look me in the eyes. What country is Oceania at war with?" Winston thought. He knew what was meant by Oceania, and that he himself was a citizen of Oceania. He also remembered Eurasia and East Asia. But who was at war with whom he did not know. In fact, he had not been aware that there was any war. "I don't remember." "Oceania is at war with East Asia. Do you remember that now?" "Yes." "Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, since the beginning of your life, since the beginning of the party, since the beginning of history. The war has continued without a break. Always the same war. Do you remember that?" "Yes." 11 years ago, you created a legend about 3 men who had been condemned to death for treachery. You pretended that you had seen a piece of paper which proved them innocent. No such piece of paper ever existed. You invented it, and later you grew to believe in it. You remember now the very moment at which you first invented it? Do you remember that?" "Yes." "Just now, I held up the fingers of my hand to you. You saw 5 fingers. Do you remember that?" "Yes." O'Brien held up the fingers of his left hand with the thumb concealed. "There are 5 fingers here. Do you see 5 fingers?" "Yes." And he did see them. For a fleeting instant, fleeting means very, very short instant. Fleeting means fly away quickly. So for a fleeting instant before the scenery of his mind changed, he saw 5 fingers, and there was no deformity. Then everything was normal again, and the old fear, the hatred, and the bewilderment. Bewilderment is confusion. The bewilderment came crowding back again. But there had been a moment, he did not know long, 30 seconds perhaps, of luminous certainty, when each new suggestion of O'Brien's had filled up a patch of emptiness and become absolute truth, and when 2 and 2 could have been 3 as easily 5, if that were what was needed. It had faded, but before O'Brien had dropped his hand. But though he could not recapture it, he could remember it, as one remembers a vivid experience at some period of one's life, when one was, in effect, a different person. "You see now," said O'Brien, "that it is at any rate possible." "Yes," said Winston. O'Brien stood up with a satisfied air. Over to his left, Winston saw the man in the white coat break an ampoule and draw back a plunger of a syringe. Okay, we have to look up ampoule. I have no idea what an ampoule is. Let's see. A sealed glass capsule containing a liquid. Ready for injecting. Let's find an image. Okay, so this is oddly specific English vocabulary. This is an ampoule. So that's something that you would see from a doctor or in a hospital. O'Brien turned to Winston with a smile. In almost the old manner he resettled his spectacles on his nose. "Do you remember writing in your diary," he said, "that it did not matter whether I was a friend or an enemy, since I was at least a person who understood you and could be talked to? You were right. I enjoy talking to you. Your mind appeals to me. It resembles my own mind, except that you happen to be insane. Before we bring the session to an end..." You can even ask me a few questions if you choose. Any question I like? Anything. He saw that Winston's eyes were upon the dial. It switched off. What is your first question? What have you done with Julia? O'Brien smiled again. She betrayed you, Winston. Immediately, unreservedly. I have seldom seen anyone come over to us so promptly. You would hardly recognize her if you saw her. All her rebelliousness, her deceit, her folly, her dirty-mindedness, everything has been burned out of her. It was a perfect conversion, a textbook case. You tortured her? O'Brien left this unanswered. Next question, he said. Does Big Brother exist? Of course he exists. The party exists. Big Brother is the embodiment of the party. Does he exist in the same way I exist? You do not exist, said O'Brien. Once again the sense of helplessness assailed him. He knew, or he could imagine, the arguments which proved his own non-existence, but they were nonsense. They were only a play on words. Did not this statement, "You do not exist," contain a logical absurdity? But what use was it to say so? His mind shriveled as he thought of the unanswerable, mad arguments with which O'Brien would demolish him. I think I exist, he said wearily. I'm conscious of my own identity. I was born and I shall die. I have arms and legs. I occupy a particular point in space. No other solid object can occupy the same point simultaneously. In that sense, does Big Brother exist? It is of no importance. He exists. Will Big Brother ever die? Of course not. How could he die? Next question. Does the Brotherhood exist? That, Winston, you will never know. If we choose to set you free when we have finished with you, and if you live to be 90 years old, still you will never learn whether the answer to that question is yes or no. As long as you live, it will be an unsolved riddle in your mind. Winston lay silent. His breast rose and fell a little faster. He still had not asked the question that had come into his mind first. He'd got to ask it, and yet it was as though his tongue would not utter it. There was a trace of amusement in O'Brien's face. Even his spectacles seemed to wear an ironical gleam. He knows, thought Winston suddenly, he knows what I'm going to ask. At that point, the words burst out of him. What is in room 101? The expression on O'Brien's face did not change. He answered dryly. You know what is in room 101, Winston. Everyone knows what's in room 101. He raised his finger to the man in the white coat. Evidently, the session was at an end. The needle jerked into Winston's arm. He sank almost instantly into a deep sleep. All right, well, that was Chapter 2 of Part 3 of 1984 by George Orwell. Thank you, everyone who stayed and watched. And I look forward to seeing you again when we read Chapter 3 of Part 3 of 1984. We're almost finished with the book. We're very close to the end now. So I can't wait to see what happens. All right, I will see you later. Goodbye.